"Sorry, sir. This seat has been reserved for a VIP passenger. I'll need you to move." The words sliced through the quiet cabin like the sound of tearing fabric. Julian Brooks looked up, meeting the flight attendant's thin, perfectly rehearsed smile, flawless in training, yet cold as glass in her eyes. He didn't answer right away. 3 long seconds passed, long enough for her to shift her weight slightly, betraying a flicker of unease. The Liberty Coast Airlines jet was still boarding its final passengers at LAX, the last rays of the California sun pouring through the windows, glinting off the silver-gray leather seats. Julian closed his laptop, his fingers still smelling faintly of aluminum. The report he'd been reading would soon determine the fate of 300 employees in his company. But now another test awaited him, smaller perhaps, but painfully familiar. "This is my seat," he said calmly, his voice firm. "I booked and paid for it in full." The flight attendant, Kelly Barnes, according to her badge, kept her smile intact, but lowered her tone. "I understand, sir, but we're handling a special situation. I hope you can cooperate." Julian glanced around. No one else was being asked to move. Only him. A black man in a simple grey suit, no logo, no insignia, a presence too quiet to stand out, yet somehow out of place. He could feel the stares from other passengers. Some pretended to be absorbed in their phones. Others stole quick glances before looking away. An older couple whispered to each other, their expressions laced with doubt. He didn't need to hear the words. He knew that silent language too well. 15 minutes earlier, at the check-in counter, the agent had given him the same look. "Business class seat 2A. "Are you sure, sir?" Her voice carried a syrupy disbelief, as if she'd just heard a joke. Julian smiled and handed her his e-ticket, more certain than ever. She had taken over a minute to confirm his reservation, twice as long as the white couple before him. When she finally printed his luggage tag, she didn't say, "Have a pleasant flight," like usual. She simply slid the suitcase toward him and nodded stiffly. From the ticket counter to the gate, those small details had strung together into a picture he could no longer pretend not to see: forced smiles, watchful eyes, the heavy silence whenever he walked through the priority lane. For years, Julian had believed that after 2 decades building Brooks Capital from nothing, he had earned his way past all that. But it turned out a plane ticket was all it took for the illusion of equality to vanish like smoke. Now sitting in the luxury of business class, where a single seat cost 10 times that of economy, Kelly stood before him, her hands gripping the drink tray, her tone sugar-coated. "Sir, we just need you to move to another seat. It's very comfortable as well." Julian tilted his head slightly. "Could you explain why this seat has been assigned to one of our VIP passengers, one of the company's major shareholders?" Kelly replied, avoiding his gaze. Julian almost laughed. "A major shareholder," she said. "He was one of them, but that detail wasn't printed on a boarding pass. And he knew exactly what would happen if he revealed it: panic-delayed apologies and the familiar chorus of "we didn't mean to." No, he didn't want to use power to reclaim what already belonged to him. He just wanted fairness, the kind that required no explanation. The cabin fell quiet. A few passengers began to watch. A man in the front row raised an eyebrow. A middle-aged woman whispered, "What's going on?" Julian felt his heartbeat, slow, that steady rhythm he'd mastered over years of holding back anger. "You know," he said softly, "everything in life runs on procedure. But if that procedure only applies to people who look like me, maybe the problem isn't the procedure." Kelly froze. For a moment, confusion flickered in her eyes, then the mask returned the same mechanical smile. "I'll call my supervisor, sir." When she walked away, Julian leaned back and closed his eyes. He could hear the low hum of whispers, the roll of luggage wheels, the clink of metal trays in the galley. Every sound echoed inside him, merging into a familiar background noise, the sound of years spent proving he was good enough to be respected. He remembered the first time he stepped into a boardroom in New York 20 years ago, a sea of white suits, where he was introduced as the first face of diversity in the company. They applauded, but it wasn't welcome applause. It was the acknowledgement of an exception. Since then, he had built a financial empire worth billions. Yet at this very moment, because of his skin, all of it seemed to vanish. Kelly returned this time with a man in a Navy uniform, Tom Reynolds, the flight supervisor. His tone was professional, but his eyes had already judged. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. There seems to be a small system issue." "May I see your ticket?" Julian handed him his phone silently. Tom scanned the QR code, then looked up. "You booked this seat with a personal account, not through your company. That's correct." Tom frowned slightly, as if uncovering evidence. "That's strange. We have another VIP passenger, also a platinum member, assigned to seat 2A. It might be easier if you move to economy, and we'll refund the difference." Julian met his gaze. "I didn't buy a ticket to get a refund. I bought it to sit here." The silence tightened like a stretched string. Tom tried to keep his voice steady, but his breath was quickening. "If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to call airport security." Julian leaned back, slightly folded his hands, and lowered his voice, firm as steel. "I'm cooperating, just not with injustice. And if you're calling anyone, make sure they know aviation law about seat rights before they lay a hand on me." Kelly swallowed hard. Tom flushed red. The entire cabin froze. An elderly woman in row 4 leaned forward and whispered, "I saw him board with the priority group. That's his seat." Tom turned sharply. "Ma'am, please don't interfere." Julian looked out the window. The California sky was fading to pale orange. In that moment, he realized that the fight for equality doesn't always begin in courtrooms or boardrooms. Sometimes it begins right here, in seat 2A, when you're forced to prove that you have the right to sit where you paid to be. He took a deep breath, an unexpected calm settling in. He didn't know that within minutes, this quiet standoff would trigger a chain of events that would shake the entire airline and save hundreds of lives who would never know how close they'd come to losing them. All he knew was one simple truth. He wasn't leaving this seat. Not out of pride, but out of dignity. The one thing he had spent his whole life fighting to protect. The air inside the cabin was thick as if a storm was about to break. Every small sound, the click of a seatbelt, the clatter of a metal tray, the quiet murmur of voices seemed sharper than usual. Julian Brooks remained seated, in 2A calm in posture, but with eyes that had shifted from warm brown to cold steel, like a man prepared to survey an entire battlefield. Tom Reynolds, the flight supervisor, stood blocking the aisle holding his tablet that displayed the seat map. Beside him, Kelly Barnes crossed her arms, wearing the self-assured look of someone who believed authority was always on her side. Every gesture they made was wrapped in professional politeness, but Julian could see every fracture beneath the surface, the forced tone, the quickened breaths, the caution that barely hid the prejudice behind their eyes. Mr. Brooks, Tom began, keeping his voice polite. "We have a priority guest on board. He reserved seat 2A last week. The system must have made an error. We just need your cooperation." Julian leaned slightly forward, his voice low but resonant. I booked this ticket 14 days ago. I have the confirmation code, the payment receipt, and the email directly from Liberty Coast Airlines. What's the name of this system that keeps making mistakes? Discrimination. The question dropped into the air like a stone into still water. Ripples spread through the cabin, reaching even those pretending to read newspapers or scroll through their phones. A few heads lifted. A white man in the row ahead frowned, clearly annoyed not at the injustice, but at the disturbance. A young woman turned to her husband and whispered, "He probably got upgraded by mistake, just ignore it." Julian was no stranger to those reactions. He'd been hearing them his whole life, sometimes spoken, sometimes in silence. Then a voice, cut through, smooth, confident, and accustomed to command. "What's going on here? I'm waiting for my seat." All eyes turned. The man entering was Gregory Hale, around 55, silver hair, neatly cropped, wearing an expensive navy suit and a shining Patek Philippe watch. The sharp scent of his cologne filled the air like a declaration of power. Tom's demeanor changed instantly. His tone softened, his eyes lowered. "Mr. Hale, my apologies. We're resolving a seating issue, just a moment." Gregory didn't answer. He simply looked Julian up and down, his cold, assessing stare saying, "Everything. Who are you to sit in my seat? Seat 2A is mine," Gregory said, making no attempt to hide his irritation. "My assistant confirmed it with the airline. I fly this route every week. They know that." Then he turned toward Julian, his voice laced with patronizing pity. "Perhaps you've made a mistake. Business class can be complicated for those who don't fly often." Kelly pressed her lips together, suppressing a smile. Julian looked at him, calm, so calm it made the entire cabin uneasy. "No, I haven't made a mistake. I know exactly where I'm sitting. And I know I paid for this seat." Gregory gave a short, sharp laugh. "Of course. Maybe some company upgraded you. Diversity programs are very generous these days." The words sliced through the air. Kelly turned her head away. Tom looked uneasy. Julian said nothing, but his hand tightened on his thigh. It wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. The exhaustion of always having to choose between two things, staying silent to keep the peace, or standing up to protect his dignity. He chose the latter. "Mr. Hale," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "You don't know anything about me, but you've already told me everything about yourself." Gregory raised an eyebrow and sneered. "Excuse me, what did you just say? No need to apologize." Julian replied, his gaze unwavering. "Just learn how to respect others. It's a difficult lesson, I understand." Tom stepped in, his voice tight. "All right, everyone, let's calm down. Mr. Brooks, I'm asking you to move to economy class. We'll offer compensation or rebook you on another flight." "No." One word, firm and final, froze the air. Gregory folded his arms, smirking. "Then I'll call my lawyer. I'm not sitting next to someone who doesn't respect the rules. That seat is mine." Julian leaned forward, pulled out his phone and tapped the record button. A soft click broke the silence. His voice was steady, low and clear. "My name is Julian Brooks. I'm recording this conversation because I believe I am being discriminated against. I purchased a valid ticket boarded according to protocol, and I'm being asked to leave my seat without a legitimate reason. This recording is my evidence." Tom's voice wavered. "Sir, you can't record on an airplane," Julian answered calmly. "I can. This is a public space, and I'm protecting my rights." Every eye turned towards them. A few passengers raised their own phones. Among them was Trevor Scott, a black passenger in seat 5C, who had started live streaming to social media. On Liberty Coast Flight 482, a black passenger is being forced out of his paid seat for a white man claiming to be a VIP. Share this, everyone." A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. An elderly woman in row 4, Helen Moore, spoke up, her voice trembling. "I saw him board with the priority group. That's his seat. What you're doing is wrong." Kelly turned sharply, her voice cold. "Mom, please don't interfere. You don't have all the information." Helen's voice cracked with emotion. "I don't need information to know what's right." Gregory spun around, raising his voice. "What's right is that I paid for this seat. I don't know how he got his ticket, but someone clearly made a mistake." Julian didn't respond. He set his phone down on the tray table, the small red light from the recording reflecting in his eyes like a spark. "Mr. Reynolds," he said evenly, "if the airline wants to call security, I request that they follow proper protocol and state the reason in writing. I'm not moving unless there's an official directive." Tom hesitated, glancing between Julian and Gregory, whose face was now flushed with anger. Before he could speak, a sharp voice from the front cabin cut through. "What's holding up this flight? I have a meeting in Boston in 4 hours." The storm had truly begun. Gregory raised a hand in mock agreement. "Thank you, my friend, we all want to take off." But apparently someone here thinks the rules don't apply to him. He pointed straight at Julian. That phrase, "someone like him," made the whole cabin tense. Julian took a deep breath. His mother's old words echoed in his mind. "Never let anyone decide your worth." He looked Gregory straight in the eye, his voice low but strong enough to carry through the cabin. "I'm not asking for privilege. I'm asking for fairness. If that offends you, then the problem isn't me." The cabin fractured in silence. Some people looked down, others turned toward the window. Kelly gripped her serving tray, her nails pressing into her skin. Tom turned away and picked up the intercom phone. Julian looked out the window where the last rays of the California sun were fading. He knew this wouldn't end here. Someone would come security, maybe even the captain. But whatever happened, he knew he hadn't stayed silent. Something had awakened within him, not anger but conviction. The conviction that if you have to fight for the right to sit where you belong, then you fight. He tightened his grip on the seat's armrest, his gaze fixed on the golden sky outside. A new chapter of his life had just begun, right there, in seat 2A. The noise in the business cabin spread like an oil stain. Some people sighed, some shook their heads, a few tilted their phones toward Julian, ready to capture a drama in the sky. Julian Brooks stayed where he was, eyes fixed on the space outside the window, where the Los Angeles sunset streaked across the sky like a slow-moving flame. He did not need to look around, just listening was enough. They were talking about him, judging him, defining him by his skin, before even asking his name. The cabin door opened again. A man in a black uniform suit stepped out of the cockpit, his nameplate reading Captain Robert Hughes. He was tall, with a square face, and a voice that carried the weight of someone accustomed to giving orders. "What is going on, Tom?" he asked, his eyes sweeping across the cabin. Tom Reynolds quickly explained the situation, trying to keep his tone neutral. But every word he chose, uncooperative, disrupting procedure, refusing to follow crew instructions, was the kind of trained language designed to put the blame on the person being complained about. When Tom finished speaking, Captain Hughes turned to Julian, his gaze carrying that familiar air of authority. "Sir, I am the captain of this flight. I have been informed that you are refusing to move from a seat that has been assigned to another passenger. Is that correct?" Julian looked at him, his eyes calm but deep. "I am refusing to leave the seat I paid for, which the airline confirmed for me. If you would like, I can show you all the documentation." Captain Hughes folded his arms, his tone turning cold. "Sir, on this aircraft, the crew's decision is final. If you do not cooperate, we will have to call security." Standing just behind him, Gregory Hale spoke with the weight of someone already convinced he had won. "You see, even the captain says so. I do not have time for this. I have a board meeting in Boston." Julian turned his head and looked straight at Gregory, his voice low and sharp like ground steel. "We all have important things to do, Mr. Hale. I just do not believe what I have to do is worth less because my skin does not match yours." Gregory snorted. "I am not talking about skin color. I am talking about attitude. Everyone here needs to know their place. You cannot turn the business cabin into a place to teach morals." The words exploded into a silent shockwave through the cabin. Some people raised their heads. More phones came up, screens glowing under the warm cabin lights. Julian drew in a deep breath. The soft hum of the engines spooling up filled his ears. But beneath that familiar noise, there was another sound, smaller and more precise, like metal brushing against metal, then stopping, then repeating. He frowned. He had heard that sound before, many years earlier, over the desert in Qatar, when he was a staff sergeant in aircraft maintenance in the United States Air Force. It was the sound of a bearing about to fail, the quiet groan of metal before it melted down. His heart began to pound faster. "Captain Hughes," his voice rang out calm, but carrying weight before you make any further decision. "I need you to listen to something." Hughes frowned. "What are you trying to say? The right engine?" Julian said, "I am hearing an unusual sound, a repeating vibration every 3 seconds. It sounds like a small fracture in the high-pressure compressor shaft bearing. If I am right, this aircraft is not safe to take off." The whole cabin froze. Kelly's eyes widened. Gregory let out a mocking laugh. Now he thinks he is an aerospace engineer or a pilot. "My God, do not tell me you are some kind of world-saving expert." A few chuckles rose around them. Julian ignored them. He kept his eyes on the captain, his voice serious and precise. "I served 6 years in the military as a jet maintenance specialist. I know the difference between normal vibration and the kind that warns of a failure. If I am wrong, an inspection will prove it. But if I am right, we are sitting on a metal bomb." Captain Hughes studied him, the coldness in his gaze slowly fading. He was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "If I have it checked and nothing is wrong, will you leave the plane?" Julian nodded. "No one will have to force me. If I am wrong, I will walk off." The certainty in his voice silenced the entire cabin. Hughes gave a short nod and lifted his radio. "Ground crew, this is the captain of flight, LC-482. I need a technical inspection of engine number 2, especially the high-pressure compressor shaft bearing. Check temperature and vibration immediately." There was a pause, then the ground engineer's voice came through. "Captain, the engine was just inspected before this flight. All readings were within normal range." "Do it again," Hughes replied, and now there was a trace of urgency in his tone. "Manual inspection, not just the data. I want a report in 15 minutes. Gregory sprang to his feet. "Are you kidding me? You are taking the word of a random passenger over the airline's engineers. You are letting a troublemaker delay our flight." Mr. Hale Hughes said firmly, "If there is even a 1% chance he is right, I cannot risk the lives of 180 people. If you want to object, file a complaint later." Gregory choked off his protest. For the first time since the whole ordeal began, Julian saw the arrogance in his eyes waver. 15 minutes of waiting passed as slowly as a century. No one spoke. Trevor Scott kept live streaming, narrating, "The captain is rechecking the engine after a black passenger warned about a problem. The entire flight is being held on the ground. If he is right, this will be unbelievable." The viewer count kept climbing. Julian closed his eyes and listened closely. The metallic sound had faded softer now, because the engine had been shut down temporarily. In his mind, memories surged back hot desert winds in Afghanistan, the night he saved a C-130 from a similar explosion just by noticing a strange whistle in the engine bay. Back then, his superiors called it luck. But Julian knew it was experience, instinct, and respect for his work, even if he had been nothing more than an anonymous mechanic. 15 minutes later, the radio crackled again. "Captain Hughes, this is the lead engineer. Report bearing temperature is 15% higher than normal. There is a cyclical vibration every 3 seconds matching the passenger's description. We have found metal shavings in the lubricant oil. The engine is not safe for takeoff." The cabin went dead silent. Gregory dropped into his seat, his face drained of color. Kelly's mouth hung open. Tom fumbled his tablet, nearly dropping it. Captain Hughes clutched the radio, his voice tight. "What would have happened if we had taken off? There is a significant risk of engine fire within 20 minutes. The captain exhaled slowly, a long, heavy breath, as if he were releasing the weight of the whole sky. He lifted his head and looked at Julian. Their eyes met, one carrying formal authority, the other quiet composure, and for the first time there was real respect in that gaze. "You just saved this entire flight," Hughes said softly, almost only for Julian to hear. Julian answered quietly, "I only did what I had to do. The rest is your job." When the captain returned to the cockpit to make his announcement, the cabin erupted into a chaotic mix of panic, awe, and shame. Gregory Hale sat still, his eyes empty. Kelly stepped back, her hands trembling. Tom lowered his head, avoiding the passenger's eyes. Julian, the man who had just been called a troublemaker, someone who does not know his place, was now the reason they were all still breathing. But he felt no triumph. What he felt was sadness, because he had to prove his worth by saving lives instead of simply being trusted as a human being. Outside the window, the sunset was gone. The ground lights had come on, reflecting off the metal skin of the Airbus like sharp points of light. Julian leaned back and closed his eyes. He knew the real storm was only just beginning. No one said a word for the first 2 minutes after Captain Robert Hughes announced, "We are delaying this flight to replace the engine. All passengers, please remain in your seats." The words hung in the air like a suspended verdict over the business cabin. Julian Brooks sat still, his hands loosely clasped over his knees. The quiet he felt was not victory, but a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. He did not need to look around to know what was happening, eyes avoiding his, a few faces gone pale, and a forest of phones quietly recording. Across from him, Gregory Hale sat frozen, his fist clenched so tightly the knuckles blanched. The pride he had worn like armor was now cracked wide open. Kelly Barnes stood near the galley door, her shoulders trembling. She did not dare look at Julian. And Tom Reynolds, the man who was used to being the one who gave orders, could only bow his head, his eyes empty. Outside, the sun had disappeared completely. The cabin lights came on, washing everything in a cold, flat white that exposed every expression that could no longer be hidden. Then the radio crackled from the cockpit, the voice of the lead engineer coming through. "Captain, additional report. If the aircraft had taken off, the engine would have completely failed in approximately 20 minutes. There was a risk of fire. The passenger was correct. The atmosphere shattered. A few passengers broke into tears. A young man holding his phone stared at the screen with shaking hands. My God, we almost died. Helen Moore, the silver-haired woman in row 4, brought a hand to her chest and looked at Julian with eyes shining with tears. Julian lowered his head and exhaled softly. He did not want to be a hero. He did not need applause. But now every gaze was on him, as if he had just stepped out of the pages of a legend. The captain walked over his face, pale, but his voice strangely steady. "Mr. Brooks, I want to say that without you, we would have faced a disaster. I owe you the lives of 186 people." Julian shook his head. "No one owes me anything. I just did what was right." Then he looked around, his eyes softening. "But there is something you should know, something that made this incident even more dangerous than the mechanical failure itself, the way you treated the person who raised the warning." The sentence flew through the air like a quiet arrow. Kelly burst into tears. Tom turned away. Gregory, his face flushed and lips trembling, still tried to cling to what was left of his authority. "You are trying to turn this into a matter of race," he snapped, "when this was just a misunderstanding. A system error. No one meant anything by it." Julian turned to him, his gaze like a flat, still mirror, reflecting everything back. No one meant anything, but everyone stayed silent. And that silence almost killed us all. The cabin fell completely still. Then Trevor Scott, the passenger, who had been filming from the beginning, spoke up. "No, you are not wrong. I have already posted this video. People need to see what just happened here." He held up his phone. On the screen, the view count showed hundreds of thousands, the number climbing as fast as a countdown. "The whole world is watching." Gregory sprang to his feet. "You have no right to record me. I will sue you." Trevor did not even blink. "You have the right to remain silent, and that is the best right you should use right now." A short burst of laughter escaped from a few passengers, not because it was funny, but because they needed to release the pressure. A small breath of relief after staring down terror. Julian looked around. In the eyes of these strangers, he saw a shift from prejudice to shame, then to respect. But he did not want to stop there. He unlocked his phone and typed a message. "Linda, I need you now. Patriot flight. C482 discrimination case in progress. Engine failure confirmed." He hit send. Linda Price, his legal advisor, and a member of the board of Liberty Coast Airlines, the one person he trusted completely, would know exactly what to do. Only a few minutes later, Julian's phone vibrated. A video call request appeared on the screen. He turned on the speaker and angled the phone so everyone could see. Linda Price's face appeared brown, wavy hair framing sharp eyes that cut like a blade. Her voice was low and cool, the voice of someone used to ending careers with a single sentence. "Good evening, everyone," she said slowly. "My name is Linda Price, legal counsel for Brooks Capital Partners, the firm that owns 40% of Liberty Aviation Group, the parent company of Liberty Coast Airlines." The air froze. Kelly sobbed harder. Tom seemed to sway on his feet. Gregory opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Linda continued. "I have spoken with CEO Stephen Calloway. He is on his way to the airport. But before he arrives, I am authorized to make temporary decisions." She looked straight into the camera, her voice turning to steel. "Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Barnes, both of you are suspended from duty immediately for serious violations of conduct and the airline's equality policy. Your employee credentials are revoked. Security staff will escort you off the aircraft." Tom went ashen. Kelly collapsed into a seat. covering her face with her hands. "As for you, Mr. Gregory Hale," Linda said, her tone dropping lower each word. "Landing like a hammer, your platinum membership is revoked. You are indefinitely banned from all Liberty Coast flights and all allied partners. Our legal team will contact you regarding your abusive conduct and public disturbance." Gregory shot to his feet, his voice cracking. "You cannot," Linda cut him off. "You have the right to remain silent, and it is in your best interest to use it." She ended the call. The last sound was the dry beep signaling the connection had closed. Julian sat quietly watching. He felt no satisfaction, only a deep weight in his chest. He knew Linda had done what needed to be done, but deep down he understood that this punishment would not erase the fractures that had existed in the system for far too long, the habit of judging people by their skin, the way power hid behind politeness, and the word procedure. Helen Moore stood up, her voice trembling but firm. "Mr. Brooks, I am sorry. I saw what happened, and all I did was say a few small words. I should have done more." Julian gave her a gentle smile. "You did the right thing. You spoke up. No one is expected to be a hero. We just need to not stay silent." The passengers around them nodded faintly. A young white passenger said quietly, "I used to think like them. Now I see I was wrong. Thank you." Julian only nodded. "Do not thank me. Just remember this lesson." Captain Hughes returned his voice, deeper and more sincere than ever. "We are replacing the entire engine. Mr. Brooks, on behalf of the entire crew, thank you, not only for saving our lives, but for showing us something more important than flight safety." Julian tilted his head slightly. "Respect," he said. "That is the only thing that truly keeps people safe." The captain nodded, then walked away. Julian looked around. The whole cabin looked as if it had just been through a storm, belongings scattered, nerves shaken, and in the middle of it all, an empty space where everyone was being forced to look at themselves. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids he saw his mother, the woman who had taught him, "When people doubt you, let your actions answer for you." This time, those actions did not just save him, they saved all of them. And somewhere out there, in a world of business-class seats and glances that measure people by the color of their skin, the truth had just been given permission to take flight. The voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a technical issue, we will require all passengers to disembark to allow the replacement of the engine. Please remain calm and follow the instructions of the cabin crew." The door opened. The line of passengers began to move slow and heavy like a silent march. No one spoke loudly. No one dared to complain. Only the sound of suitcase wheels rolled along the floor, dry and hollow, dragging the echo of what had just happened. Julian Brooks was the last to leave the cabin. As he stepped down the jet bridge, he could feel the weight in the air behind him, the mix of grateful, uneasy, and embarrassed glances following his steps. At the end of the bridge stood Captain Robert Hughes, waiting. The yellow lights of the airport spilled across his middle-aged face, making him look 10 years older. "Mr. Brooks," Hughes said, quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know what to say, except thank you." "Without you," Julian interrupted softly, his tone calm but firm. "Don't thank me. Thank the truth. Because if I had stayed silent today, none of us would have the chance to speak at all." Hughes nodded, his eyes glistening red. "I understand. And I swear I'll never allow injustice to exist on one of my flights again." Julian simply smiled. He didn't need promises. He needed actions. As he turned off the jet bridge, a group of people in suits approached the aircraft. Leading them was Stephen Calloway, the CEO of Liberty Coast Airlines. The man was in his early 60s, his neatly cut silver hair framing a face of stern features now shadowed with worry. He was accompanied by 2 assistants and a security officer. The moment he saw Julian, he stopped. Their eyes met unbelonging to the man who had nearly been removed from the very airline he owned shares in the other, to the one carrying a brewing corporate crisis on his shoulders. Julian Stephen began his voice, low and tired. Stephen Julian replied, not waiting for introductions. "I assume you've heard everything?" "Heard and seen," Stephen said, his voice cracking slightly. "The video is everywhere. I can't believe what my own team did to one of our major shareholders." Julian crossed his arms, his expression calm but cutting. "Not just to me. They've done it to countless passengers who don't have the power to defend themselves. This time they just picked the wrong one." Stephen lowered his head, drawing in a slow breath before speaking again. "I came here to apologize, not just on my behalf, but on behalf of the entire airline. We failed. The system failed." Julian's voice was deep and unwavering. "No, Stephen. People failed because they forgot that power isn't meant to decide who is worthy. When respect becomes a privilege instead of a principle, this stops being an airline. It becomes a quiet hierarchy." Stephen said nothing. Julian's words hung in the cold air of the jet bridge. "Can we talk privately?" Stephen asked. Julian nodded. They walked into the now empty business lounge, where the dim overhead lights cast reflections of the 2 men onto the glass table between them, one a powerful CEO, the other a man who had been humiliated inside the very empire he helped build. Stephen sank into a seat, his hands clasped together. "The board has already held an emergency video session. Linda Price just sent me her report. We're launching an internal investigation, but I want to hear it from you." "What do you need from me?" Julian leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, his gaze locked. "I don't need an apology. I don't need a PR campaign to restore the company's image. I need real change." "What kind of change?" Stephen asked. Julian spoke slowly, every word, like a nail being driven into wood. "First, conduct a full audit of the seating and priority upgrade systems. I want the real numbers, how many passengers of color were reassigned, downgraded, or questioned. Second, every training program for your staff must be re-evaluated by an independent third party specializing in unconscious bias. Third, create a passenger advisory council representing minority communities. Not symbolic, but with actual voting power in service policy decisions. Fourth, every employee dismissed today must be told the real reason, not procedural errors, but discrimination. They need to understand the consequence of their choices." Stephen listened in silence, his expression tightening, not out of resistance, but from the weight of facing the truth. Julian continued, "And finally, I want Liberty Coast Airlines to become a living example of ethical responsibility. Not in words, in action. I will personally oversee the process. Linda Price will move from observer to full board member. I want her to head the Ethics and Inclusion Committee." Stephen closed his eyes and sighed. "You want me to strip down the entire framework of this company?" "No," Julian said quietly. "I want you to rebuild it with truth." Silence settled again. From the distance, the intercom echoed, "Passengers, please proceed to gate number 9 for replacement flight information." Julian stood. "One more thing," he said, his tone softer, but equally firm. "Call every passenger who was on this flight today, every single one. Not an email, not a statement, but a real conversation. They deserve to hear it from the CEO himself. Stephen's eyes widened. 186 people, not an obligation, Julian interrupted. A responsibility. In that moment, under the white lights, Stephen Calloway saw not just a major shareholder before him, but a mirror reflecting his own image, tired, disoriented, and standing on the edge between managing and leading. He nodded slowly and said, "You'll have the report in 60 days. Not a day later. Julian smiled faintly. Good. Because justice doesn't like to wait. When they stepped back into the terminal, the crowd around the gate was still buzzing. Eyes turned toward Julian, not with curiosity, but with gratitude. Helen Moore approached and took his hand. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for not staying silent. I've lived long enough to know silence has its own kind of guilt." Julian squeezed her hand gently. "No one's a hero for speaking the truth, just human, and that's enough." Trevor Scott came up still holding his phone. "Mr. Brooks, the video hit over 1 million views. People are calling you the man who saved an airline." Julian shook his head, his voice soft as a whisper. "I didn't save an airline. I reminded them that when people forget the dignity of others, they're the ones who start to fall." The airport lights reflected off the polished floor, stretching his shadow beside hundreds of others. No one knew that in that moment, amid the smell of fuel, the amber light and tear-streaked faces, Liberty Coast Airlines had just made history. Not through a tragedy, but through a landing in truth. And in the darkness spreading beyond the windows, Julian Brooks understood that the next flight would carry more than passengers. It would carry something long overdue, the restoration of faith in the simplest thing people so easily forget respect. 3 hours later, when Liberty Coast Airlines' replacement aircraft finally took off, the night sky had wrapped itself in a deep velvet blue. Moonlight washed over thin layers of cloud and lit up the silver letters Liberty Coast shimmering along the fuselage. In the business cabin, no one spoke. The silence was not ordinary quiet. It was a natural kind of respect, born after people had just come face to face with the fragile line between arrogance and survival. Julian Brooks sat in seat 2A, still the same seat, but the feeling was different. The seat was no longer a symbol of privilege. It was now proof of a lesson the entire airline would have to remember. He opened his laptop, the screen reflecting his face in a soft, bluish glow. His eyes were still tired, but in them there was the calm of a man who had just walked through a storm and come out the other side. Ahead of him, the new captain, Elena Morales, appeared. She looked to be around 40, with a compact build, bright eyes, and the strong voice of a woman used to standing in the middle of pressure. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "I am the one flying tonight's service to Boston. I just wanted to thank you, not only for the engine issue, but for the lesson you left with all of us." Julian smiled and closed his laptop. "I am not here to teach anyone. I just refuse to be treated like an empty seat." Elena nodded. "I understand. And I think if more people had the courage to speak up the way you did, this industry would look very different." Then she placed a hand over her chest and dipped her head slightly. "We will make sure you have a flight that is safe and worthy of you." She returned to the cockpit, but a few minutes later her voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Elena Morales. I would like to inform you that today's flight is completely safe after the engine replacement. But before we take off, there is something I need to say. Today, one passenger saved all of our lives by standing firm and daring to stand up for what is right. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to express our deepest gratitude to Mr. Julian Brooks. Applause rose in the cabin, hesitant at first, then spreading from row to row. It was not the casual clapping of tourists. It was low, heavy, and sincere, the sound of hands coming together for the truth. Julian did not stand up. He did not bow. He simply nodded slightly and let his gaze drift from the window. Outside, the sky seemed just a little brighter. About 2 hours after takeoff, the cabin lights dimmed. A flight attendant brought hot tea. Helen Moore, the silver-haired woman who had defended him earlier, walked up to his seat. "Mr. Brooks," she said gently, "I do not know if I am alive because of you, but I do know one thing: I will never stay silent again." Julian smiled softly. "You do not have to save the world, Helen. You just have to refuse to look away when you see something wrong. That is how the world saves itself." She nodded, eyes brimming. "I taught my grandchildren that respect is free, that anyone can give it. But now I realize there are moments when it is very expensive, and you paid the price for a lot of people tonight." Julian rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. "No one owes me anything. We only owe each other basic decency." At the back of the cabin, Trevor Scott was still live streaming. His video had reached nearly 3 million views, and the hashtag FlightLC482 was trending across the country. Comments poured in. The man who was doubted then saved everyone. Discrimination is not just immoral, it is dangerous. Trevor approached, phone in hand. "Mr. Brooks, I just saw the news." Liberty Coast released an official statement. CEO Callaway announced a full-scale reform initiative and quoted you. "Respect is not a privilege, it is the standard." Julian raised an eyebrow. At least they pulled the right line. "There is more," Trevor said, his excitement hard to hide. "They invited you to speak at the company-wide Human Resources Summit next month. The entire industry is looking at you as a symbol of change." Julian shook his head with a faint laugh. "If I am a symbol, that is the sad part. Because what I did today should have been normal." Trevor smiled. Sometimes that kind of normal needs someone to start it over again. About 30 minutes later, the aircraft leveled off at 35,000 feet. Outside the window, the sky was a vast black ocean sprinkled with blurred stars. Julian opened a small notebook, an old habit from his military days. He wrote a few lines, each letter carefully shaped. "Today, I didn't fight to win. I fought to remind them that every passenger carries value, even when no one knows who they are." He looked up and scanned the cabin. The once distant faces were no longer as cold as they had been that afternoon. A middle-aged white man, who had frowned earlier about the delay, now gave him a small nod when their eyes met. A young Asian woman offered him a quiet smile. And in the last row, Trevor raised a thumb in silent acknowledgement. All of it was small, but to Julian, it meant more than the dividends of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. As the plane began its descent, Captain Morales spoke over the intercom one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning our approach into Logan Airport in Boston. Thank you for your patience today, and thank you for joining us in witnessing that courage does not always sit in the cockpit. Sometimes it sits in seat 2A. The cabin broke into applause again. This time Julian smiled fully. When the wheels touched down, the screech of friction rang out, then dissolved into a collective sigh of relief. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stayed seated for a moment, watching the line of passengers stand up to retrieve their bags. A young passenger stopped in front of him and said quietly, "Thank you. I used to think this kind of thing only happened online. Turns out it is right next to us." Julian nodded. The world only changes when someone is willing to look it in the eye. At the baggage claim area, CEO Stephen Calloway was already waiting. He walked up, unable to hide the emotion in his face, and extended his hand. "Julian, you were right. I just called every single passenger." By the 10th call, I realized something. No one needed to hear an apology. They only needed to be acknowledged as important. Julian shook his hand. "If you understand that, then this airline still has a chance." "Not just the airline," Stephen replied, "but the people running it, like me." The two men looked at each other, and for a brief moment, they were no longer CEO and shareholder, but two men sharing the same burden of repairing broken trust. Julian glanced around. Passengers were collecting their luggage, talking in low voices, some of them stepping forward to shake his hand. It occurred to him that right here in this airport, a new chapter had begun. Not about business, but about the way people look at each other. Outside the glass doors, the first light of Boston dawn washed over the runway, bathing everything in a pale gold. Julian drew in a deep breath and stepped out. He was no longer just the man who had been doubted in Seat 2A. He was the man who had forced an entire system to remember that respect, not to status, is the only standard truly worthy of taking off. 1 week after the incident on flight LC-482, America woke up to a storm of debate. Across every news channel, morning talk show and podcast, the headlines flooded the airwaves. Black CEO removed from business class seat and saved 186 lives. Julian Brooks, when respect becomes action. Liberty Coast Airlines pledges full reform after discrimination crisis. In his office on the 42nd floor of Brooks Capital's headquarters, Julian stood before the glass window overlooking the avenue below. The morning traffic sparkled under the sunlight. Across the street, the Liberty Coast Airlines building displayed a massive new banner that read, "Respect is our standard." He said nothing. Inside him, the echoes of that flight still lingered, a single engine noise, a simple question, and a costly lesson no business school could teach. Linda Price entered, carrying a thick file in her hands. She still wore her elegant grey suit, her sharp eyes as focused as ever. But this time there was a hint of warmth behind them. "You've just been selected as the cover story for Fortune Weekly this month," she said, half smiling. "They're calling you the man who grounded discrimination, the man who forced prejudice to land." Julian let out a soft laugh. I only heard the word grounded, and it reminded me of those 3 hours I spent stuck in the airport. Linda took a seat, leaning slightly forward. "You're still not used to being a symbol, are you?" He shook his head. "Symbols get admired, not heard. I want action, not titles." She nodded, then opened the folder. "Then let's act. Here's the first reform report from Liberty Coast. Stephen Calloway kept his word. 92% of employees have completed bias awareness training. The Minority Passenger Advisory Council is officially operational chaired honorarily by Helen Moore. The Ethics and Inclusion Committee has been formed, and I'm leading it. And most importantly, discrimination complaints have dropped nearly 60% in just 1 month. Julian stayed silent, a small smile flickering across his face, one that carried both pride and reflection. "Those are good numbers," he said quietly. "But Linda, real change doesn't live in reports. It lives in how people behave when no one's recording." Linda looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, That's why I work for you, Julian." 3 days later, Julian was invited to speak at the National Leadership and Ethics Forum in Boston, an event that brought together over 2,000 executives, politicians, and journalists. That morning, the wind howled across the square outside. Inside the convention center, the murmur of voices filled the air. From backstage, Julian looked toward the stage where a massive LED screen was replaying the viral footage the moment he calmly confronted the captain, the moment the flight was halted, and finally the moment everyone realized he had saved their lives. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome Julian Brooks, founder of Brooks Capital Partners, strategic shareholder of Liberty Aviation Group, and the man who proved that ethics can save lives." Applause erupted like a wave. Julian stepped forward, his posture straight, the spotlight glinting off his dark blue suit. He stopped at center stage, microphone in hand, looking out at thousands of faces. "Thank you," he began, his voice deep and warm. "But I'm not here today to retell what happened on that flight. I'm here to talk about something more dangerous than a failing engine, systemic silence." The room fell still. He took a few slow steps forward, his voice steady and flowing. "We've built an entire multi-billion-dollar industry to lift people into the sky, yet we've failed to see each other on the ground. I watched an airline operate every bolt and engine with perfection, yet fail completely at operating respect." He paused, scanning the audience. Discrimination isn't always loud or violent. It often begins with a doubtful glance, a condescending tone, an assumption that someone doesn't belong. And when that repeats long enough, it becomes culture. His voice grew lower but stronger. Culture doesn't just live in policies. It lives in the actions of people, in how staff greet passengers, in how leaders listen, and in how each of us responds when we witness injustice. Someone in the audience stood and began to clap. Then another and another. The applause spread like ripples. Julian lowered the microphone slightly, a faint, wistful smile on his lips. "That day, I only wanted to fly from Los Angeles to Boston. But I realized the true journey wasn't between two cities. It was between two mindsets. One believes human worth is measured by status. The other knows that dignity isn't measured at all. It's simply the right to exist equally." The hall erupted in applause that thundered on for minutes. In the front row, Helen Moore wiped tears from her eyes. Trevor Scott, live streaming the event, watched his viewer count soar into the hundreds of thousands in real time. When the talk ended, people crowded forward to shake Julian's hand. A young reporter asked Mr. Brooks, "Do you believe you've changed the entire airline industry?" Julian smiled faintly. "No one changes an entire industry. I just lit a candle. Real change happens when others choose to keep it burning." A young black student approached nervously. "Sir, I want to study aviation. But sometimes I'm scared that no one will believe I can ever be a pilot." Julian placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "They'll believe it when you believe in yourself enough not to wait for permission." That evening, Julian returned to his hotel overlooking Boston Harbor. Outside, seagulls skimmed the water, and the distant sound of foghorns echoed across the bay. He opened his laptop and began to type a few lines into his digital journal, a habit he kept after every turning point. "They call me a hero, but I'm just a passenger who wanted to reach his destination. Yet along the way, I learned that justice doesn't always wear the face of a judge or a gavel. Sometimes it looks like an ordinary person who chooses to stand when everyone else stays seated." Julian closed the laptop softly and looked out the window. In the distant sky, A plane was taking off its trail, glowing faintly, like words written across the heavens. Respect takes flight. He smiled, his gaze calm and gentle. Perhaps that was the ending he had hoped for. Not glory, but a moment when the world finally understood that dignity, too, has wings. 2 months after the groundbreaking speech in Boston, Liberty Coast Airlines officially announced the largest cultural reform program in the company's history. On its homepage, a new slogan appeared, "Where dignity takes flight." The logo was redesigned and a global media campaign launched. But what captured public attention was not the imagery, it was the action. Employees began sharing a new training video. Instead of memorizing codes of conduct, they discussed real situations and listened to stories from passengers who had experienced discrimination. In the video was the calm, deep voice of Julian Brooks. You don't need power to change the world. You just need the courage to see others as human. That single line spread faster than any advertisement. Within 72 hours, the hashtag #DignityTakesFlight had swept across social media, shared by celebrities, activists, and thousands of people who had once been mistreated. At the Liberty Coast headquarters, Julian stood in the new hall, where portraits of employees were displayed across a massive glass wall, each one carrying the same words, "I chose respect." Stephen Calloway stepped onto the stage, his voice steady and resolute. "Today we are not commemorating Flight LC482. We are celebrating the day Liberty Coast changed how it sees the world. There are no longer VIP passengers or regular passengers-only people." Applause thundered through the room. Elena Morales, the captain of the replacement flight that night, walked forward and presented Julian with a plaque engraved with the words, "Guardian of Integrity." Julian looked out at the hundreds of faces in the audience, faces of every color and language, and for the first time in his life, he felt he was seeing a sky without borders. After the ceremony, he stepped onto the balcony, the cool Boston breeze lifting the edge of his jacket. Linda Price joined him, a cup of coffee in hand. "You've just set a precedent every major company will have to learn from," she said. "I've already received more than 20 invitations to speak about the Brooks effect." Julian chuckled. "The what effect?" "The effect of a man who used 6 sentences to make an entire system change," she replied. He looked out toward the horizon where Liberty Coast planes were taking off one after another. "It wasn't me," he said quietly. "It was everyone who chose not to stay silent." Linda was silent for a moment, then smiled. "You know, this might be the first time in my life I felt proud to be a lawyer for a person, not for a corporation." Julian turned toward her, his smile warm but thoughtful. "We didn't save a company, Linda. We just reminded them that people are the real assets." That afternoon, he drove to the Boston Aeronautical Training Center, where Liberty Coast was hosting a special seminar for young aviation students. Inside the hall, hundreds of faces in their 20s turned toward the stage. One brown-skinned student stood up and asked, "Mr. Brooks, after everything that's happened, where do you think justice begins?" Julian paused for a few seconds, scanning the crowd, then spoke. "Justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins the moment you choose not to look away. When you see someone being treated unfairly, and you say, 'I'm here. I see this.'" His voice dropped lower, yet carried farther. "Don't wait for power to do what's right. Because if you wait, you'll become like them, the ones who looked at me, but never truly saw me." The entire hall rose to their feet in applause. Some were crying, and in the last row, Trevor Scott lifted his camera with a bright smile. This will be the first episode of the new flight stories about dignity. Late that evening, Julian returned to his hotel. From the high window, he watched planes lifting off from the runway trails of white light stretching across the dark blue sky. He checked his phone and saw a new message. "My name is Evan Blake, passenger seat 8C on flight LC482. I was silent then. Today I just signed up as a volunteer for the Dignity Takes Flight campaign. Thank you for making me realize silence is also a choice, and I choose to speak." Julian smiled gently and typed a short reply. "Welcome to the new sky, Evan." He looked outside where another plane climbed into the night. In the blinking wing lights, he saw a reflection of himself. Not a businessman, not a victim, but a human being among the clouds where every pair of wings carried equal worth. And there above the horizon, justice had taken the form of respect. 6 months after the LC482 incident, the story of Julian Brooks had been added to the ethics and leadership curriculum in many business schools. People called it the Brooks Principle. No system is truly safe if it disregards human dignity. Liberty Coast Airlines became the model for corporate culture reform. Dozens of other airlines adopted the Advisory Board of Humanity model, a council created to listen to the voices of ordinary passengers. On every seat aboard Liberty Coast flights, a small line was engraved on a metal plate, "You belong here." Julian noticed it during a short business flight and smiled quietly to himself. He didn't need to be remembered as the man who saved 186 lives. He only wanted to know that since that day, no one would ever again be forced to leave their seat just because someone else decided they didn't deserve it. One flight had ended, but the journey of justice was still in the air. 1 year after that fateful day, Julian Brooks returned to Los Angeles, the place where it had all begun. He stood in the new Liberty Coast Business Lounge, watching flight attendants greet passengers with genuine smiles, calling each one by name with sincerity instead of the judgmental glances that once filled these halls. Outside the glass window, a plane bearing the new logo took off. In the golden light of sunset, the silver letters gleaming across its body, "Dignity Takes Flight." Julian closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew the world could not be changed by one person alone, but sometimes it only takes one person's refusal to stay silent for an entire system to start listening. His phone buzzed. A message from Stephen Calloway appeared. "It's been a year, Julian, and Liberty Coast is still flying in the right direction. Thank you for reminding us that justice needs its pilots too." Julian smiled, his gaze following the aircraft as it disappeared into the clouds. In that moment, he understood. Justice was no longer just written on paper or spoken on stages. It was truly in flight, soaring across the sky, where every human being could finally be seen. From the perspective of a leadership ethics expert, Julian Brooks's journey is not just a story about discrimination or power, but a testament that respect is the only foundation on which society can truly function safely. He did not prevail through authority or anger, but through calmness, intelligence, and an unshakable belief in human worth. When respect becomes the standard, justice no longer needs to speak. It simply exists everywhere. If you believe that dignity has no color, like this video to help spread the message. Subscribe so you won't miss more stories of courage and fairness in modern life. And leave a comment below with a phrase that represents your belief. Keep dignity.